Hey, what's going on, TLC? Is your boy PT coming at you with the word of the week. We are continuing our series on Spiritual Realm 101. All right. Hey, we are fascinated with the supernatural. Are we not? Like, we look at our culture. We got the Harry Potter, right? People ate that mug up. We got the Lord of the Rings, right? Who has not watched that? If you haven't, you got problems. You got Twilight. No mentions there. We got Marvels. Everybody loves those things. We are fascinated with the supernatural. There's something innate in us that kind of like really draws to it. But when it comes to the church, all of a sudden, we develop this kind of like skeptical rationalism. And don't get me wrong, being rational is cool. Being rational is important. You got to use your mind to worship God. But one thing you have to realize is that the biblical authors, they fully embrace the supernatural worldview. They really believe in a supernatural world that coexists with our world, and there is a duty and responsibility that we have in understanding this. So if you want to understand the Bible better, okay, that's what we need to dive into. You need to begin to embrace the supernatural. Okay, you need to understand that. And so if you do, it will change the way you view the world around you, and it will bring conviction to things that you do now. I guarantee it. So are you guys ready to learn what's on the other side? All right, let's get to it. All right, so last time I left you, I told you that God had a spiritual family, his original family, before he had the human family. So today we're going to figure out and see what's on the other side. Who is God's entourage, right? We're talking about the good guys right now. We're talking about the bad guys some other time in a couple of weeks, I think. But this time, we're only going to address who the good guys are, God's entourage, all right? So the way it looks like is something like this, okay? Job chapter 38, verses 4 to 7, Psalms 82, 1 to 6, mentions a group of people, a group of beings, right? And that were there with God in his spiritual realm, okay? And what you're going to discover, what I'm going to tell you, is that these groups is not simply these words are not meant to be attributes of who they are. It's meant to be to show you the ranking of who they are. So this group right here is actually the highest ranking group in God's entourage. There's a lot of different groups in God's entourage, but this one is the highest ranking group, okay? And surprising, it's not the angels, right? So check this out. In Job chapter 38, verse 4 to 7, this is what he says here. This is when God was speaking to Job. Job was complaining. He's like, man, God, what's up with this? Why are you doing this to me? Finally, God speaks up and he says, hey, look, I'm going to ask you a few questions, see if you can answer it. Okay? And what he says here reveals this group, this highest ranking group in God's entourage. Check this out. It says, where were you? This is God speaking. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding, Job. Who determined its measurement? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Right? So again, here, this is the phrase, sons of God shouted for joy. So these beings existed before humans, right? They existed because this is talking about the laying of the foundation of the earth. In Psalms 82, verse 1 through 6, let me get through all this right here. So God has taken his place in the divine council, okay? So God is chilling in his spiritual realm in heaven, and there's a council with them. So they're telling us there's a group of beings that is with God. They're called the divine council. We'll talk more about what that looks like in a little bit. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. We'll talk about that in a little bit, right? Or later on. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? He speaks to this group. I said, this is God, you are Elohim, sons of the Most High, all of you, sons of the Most High. So these beings are considered sons of the Most High, okay? All of you. So who are they? That's the question. Sons of God. What does the text tell us about these beings? One, they are divine, not human. How do we know that? They saw the beginning of creation. Man was not even made yet, okay? Secondly, they were referenced as the morning star. And for the biblical writers, whenever they look at the heavens, they weren't just balls of gas. They saw these stars as living entity. right? And they use this metaphor to describe the sons of God, because the heavens is where the divine lived. The heavens is where the divine existed, right? So when they talk about the morning stars, they're referring to these guys as divine because they're not part of the earth. Second, they were intelligent beings. Later in Psalm, we saw that they were able to judge, right? They're labeled as sons, and this is not coincidental. For us to understand why they were labeled as sons, you have to understand the biblical context. The writers, they were writing in a time of the atmosphere of like Egypt here, and what we see in the Pharaoh's domain, his realm, his rulership, was that the higher authorities were his sons, were the closest of the relatives, were his bloodline, right? They were called sons, and they represent the highest ranking authorities. Other members in his government were lower ranking authorities, but they're still part of his government. They're usually part of his family, they're part of his extended family. So the word sons was not used coincidentally as the authors was describing God's counsel here. The sons here represents what? They're meant to signify a positional hierarchy. Okay, so these sons of God, these spiritual beings, what the author was saying was these guys are the highest ranking dudes in God's entourage. Okay, they're considered in Daniel chapter 10, they're called prince. The princes of, Michael was called the prince of Israel. You can look that up if you want, Daniel 10, right? God created a host of non-human, the implication is God created a host of non-human divine beings whose domain is an unseen realm. And all of these spiritual beings is what the Bible calls his divine counsel. Okay, so here is a kind of a diagram of God's divine counsel in terms of hierarchy, only hierarchy, okay? So we've been talking about the sons of God here. These are as a term for spiritual beings, right? Terms of spiritual beings who are highest ranking in God's counsel. And we'll talk about what they do later. But another group of spiritual beings that we didn't talk much about that most of you guys know are the angels. Okay, these are spiritual beings too. And all these here, both of these group represents God's creation. They were part of God's original family, right? They were there to be part of God's counsel. The word angel here does not represent a being with wings flying around, right? The word angel here is mainly a sphere of influence and duty. So these beings have a very specific influence and very specific duty, higher ranking than these beings. These beings have a lower sphere of influence and lower duties, but they're both still what? Spiritual beings. And this is what the Bible calls God's original family. You guys follow me? Okay. This is what's on the other side. This is God's entourage here. Now, I didn't mention a couple of other beings here. Notable mentions are the cherubim and the seraphim found in Isaiah 6. Okay. And this is where you get the idea of angels with wings are. But these cherubim and seraphim are not mentioned as angels because angels is what? It's a positional duty, not an attribute. You guys get me? Okay. But another mention I didn't have. So I didn't mention cherubim. I didn't mention seraphim, but there's another notable mention. It's the Satan. And no, it's not that Satan you're thinking about. And I know some of you guys are thinking, what? PT, you mean, is there another Satan out there? Tune in next time and I'll let you know what's that all about. Okay? I love you, TLC. You guys have a great one. As always, spread love, not fear. PT out.